Eleanor Whitmore thought she was safe, until the night her own fear became her worst enemy. One phone call, one lie, one black man pulled over by police because a wealthy white woman let panic override reason. Marcus Reed had done nothing wrong, yet suddenly his life was in danger, all because Eleanor couldn't see past the color of his skin. What happened next would force them into an impossible situation. Bound together by a contract neither wanted, trapped in a silence heavy with shame and unspoken truths. But sometimes the people who hurt us the most can teach us what we need to learn. And sometimes the hardest journey leads to the most unexpected love. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story about fear, accountability, and second chances will change how you see forgiveness forever. Eleanor Whitmore stood under the bright gallery lights, feeling like she might disappear into the white walls around her. The art opening had gone well, or at least people said it had. They'd smiled at her recommendations, nodded at her insights about the paintings, and sipped their wine with that careful politeness wealthy people wore like expensive jewelry. But Eleanor felt hollow. She clutched her phone in one hand, her small purse in the other, and tried to look interested as Mrs. Henderson talked about her daughter's wedding. Eleanor wasn't interested. She was tired. Tired of smiling. Tired of saying the right things. Tired of being the version of herself that everyone expected. "I really must go," Eleanor said, interrupting as gently as she could. "Early morning tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson looked disappointed but recovered quickly. "Of course, dear. Your mother tells me you're incredibly busy these days." Eleanor forced another smile and walked toward the door. Outside, the evening air felt cool against her flushed cheeks. The street was quiet now, the busiest part of the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Her car sat at the curb, black and sleek and waiting. Marcus Reed stood beside it, hands clasped in front of him, wearing his usual dark suit. He was tall, taller than most men she knew, with broad shoulders and a calm, steady presence that Eleanor had grown accustomed to over the past 6 months. He opened the back door when he saw her approaching. "Evening, Ms. Whitmore," he said. His voice was deep and even, professional without being cold. "Thank you, Marcus." She slid into the leather seat and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The door closed softly. A moment later, Marcus was in the driver's seat, adjusting the rear-view mirror. Their eyes met briefly in the reflection. Eleanor looked away first. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Classical music played quietly through the speakers. Marcus always kept it on the station she liked, though she'd never asked him to. The city lights blurred past the window as they moved through downtown, heading toward her neighborhood in the suburbs. Eleanor watched the back of Marcus's head. His hair was cut close, neat and precise. His posture was straight, his hands steady on the wheel. She realized she knew almost nothing about him. In 6 months, their conversations had been brief and functional. "Good morning. Traffic on the expressway? Have a good evening." She didn't know where he lived, if he had family, what he did when he wasn't driving her around. The silence in the car felt heavy tonight. Usually, Eleanor filled silence with her phone, scrolling, texting, pretending to be busy. But her battery had died at the gallery, and she'd left her charger at home. So now, there was nothing to distract her from the quiet, from the awareness that she was alone in a car with a man she'd never really talked to. A man who was a stranger. A man who was black. The thought came unbidden, and Eleanor felt ashamed the moment it entered her mind. But she couldn't push it away entirely. It sat there, uncomfortable and unwanted, like something sticky on her skin. She'd never thought of herself as racist. Her mother had taught her to be polite to everyone, to smile at the housekeeper, to tip well at restaurants regardless of who served her. Eleanor donated to charities. She'd voted for the right candidates. She believed in equality. But sitting here now, in the dark, watching the city give way to empty roads, Eleanor felt something she didn't want to name. Fear. Not fear of Marcus specifically. He'd never been anything but respectful. Never made her uncomfortable. Never even looked at her the wrong way. But fear, nonetheless. The kind that lived in the back of her mind, fed by news stories and whispered warnings and the subtle messages she'd absorbed her whole life. The kind of fear that told her to be careful, to stay alert, to not let her guard down. Marcus took a right turn onto a road Eleanor didn't recognize. Her body went rigid. Where are we? Going? The words came out sharper than she intended. Marcus glanced at her in the mirror. Expressway's backed up, Ms. Whitmore. Accident about a mile ahead. I'm taking the bypass. Oh. Eleanor's heart was pounding. I see. But she didn't see. She didn't know this road. It was darker here. Fewer streetlights. Fewer cars. Trees lined both sides, their branches reaching overhead like skeletal hands. Marcus kept driving, calm as ever. Eleanor's mind raced. Had he really said there was an accident? She hadn't seen any signs. No brake lights, no traffic slowing down. What if he was lying? What if this was planned? What if... Stop it, she told herself. You're being ridiculous. But the fear wouldn't stop. It grew, spreading through her chest like cold water. Her hands felt clammy. Her breathing quickened. She thought about her mother's warnings. You never really know people, Eleanor. You have to be careful, especially nowadays. She thought about the news stories, the headlines, that always seemed to involve danger and violence, and people who looked like Marcus. She thought about how alone she was right now. No phone, no way to call for help if something went wrong. Marcus took another turn. Eleanor's hand moved to her purse. Her fingers found the hard shape of her phone, dead, useless, and then the smooth leather of her wallet. She gripped it tightly, as if holding on to something tangible could make her feel safer. How much longer? She asked. Her voice sounded strange, thin and tight. About 15 minutes, Ms. Whitmore. Maybe less if traffic stays clear. 15 minutes. That felt like forever. The road stretched ahead, dark and winding. There were no other cars now, no houses, just trees and darkness and the quiet hum of the engine. Eleanor's fear had become something solid, something undeniable. It didn't matter that Marcus had never given her a reason to be afraid. It didn't matter that he'd been nothing but professional for 6 months. Right now, in this moment, she was terrified, and she couldn't live with that feeling. She reached into her purse again, more frantically this time. Her fingers brushed against something cold and rectangular. Not her phone, but something else. Something she'd forgotten was there. Her old phone. The backup one she kept for emergencies. The one that still had a little battery life because she never used it. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. The screen lit up, dim but functional. Enough to make a call. Eleanor glanced up at Marcus. He was focused on the road, hadn't noticed anything. She should ask him to pull over. She should tell him she felt uncomfortable and needed a moment. She should do anything except what she was about to do. But fear had taken over. Fear and panic, and something deeper. Something she'd been taught without anyone ever saying it directly. Something about danger and difference, and who to trust when you felt unsafe. Her thumb found the emergency button. She pressed it. 911, what's your emergency? Eleanor's throat felt tight. She turned toward the window, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. I'm in a car. I don't feel safe. Can you speak up, ma'am? I'm having trouble hearing you. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Marcus's expression hadn't changed. He hadn't heard her. I said I don't feel safe, Eleanor repeated, slightly louder. I'm in a car, and the driver, he's taking me somewhere I don't recognize. I'm scared. What's your location, ma'am? Eleanor looked out the window, desperate for a street sign. I don't know. We're on some back road. Trees everywhere. He said there was an accident, but I don't believe him. Can you describe the driver? Eleanor hesitated. This was the moment she could still take it back, could say this was a mistake, could hang up and pretend it never happened. But the fear was too strong. He's a black man, tall, wearing a dark suit. I think we're in, I don't know what kind of car this is. Black sedan. And your name, ma'am? Eleanor Whitmore. Stay on the line, Eleanor. I'm sending a unit to your location now. Can you keep talking to me? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, please hurry. In the front seat, Marcus shifted slightly. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Had he heard something? But no, he was just adjusting his position, rolling his shoulders like he'd been sitting too long. His eyes stayed on the road. The minutes crawled by. Eleanor kept the phone pressed to her ear, listening to the dispatcher's calm voice asking her questions, telling her to stay alert, assuring her help was coming. Then, in the rearview mirror, she saw them. Blue and red lights flashing in the darkness behind them. Marcus's eyes went to the mirror. His expression changed, not to guilt or panic, but to something else. Confusion, concern. He slowed the car and pulled over onto the shoulder. Eleanor's whole body felt numb. Ma'am, the officers are approaching the vehicle now, the dispatcher said. You can hang up. You're going to be okay. Eleanor ended the call. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. 2 police officers walked up to the car, one on each side. Their flashlights cut through the darkness. The officer on Marcus's side knocked on the window. Marcus rolled it down. His movements were slow, deliberate, careful. Evening, officer, Marcus said. His voice was steady, but Eleanor could hear something underneath it now. Wariness, the kind that came from experience. License and registration, please. Yes, sir. Marcus reached toward the glove compartment, moving slowly enough that both officers could track his hands. I'm reaching for my documents now. The officer on Eleanor's side shined his light through her window. She blinked against the brightness. Ma'am, are you all right? Eleanor opened her mouth. No sound came out. The officer opened her door. Ma'am, can you step out of the vehicle, please? Eleanor's legs felt like water as she climbed out. The cool night air hit her face. Behind the police car, she could see Marcus still in the driver's seat, hands visible on the steering wheel, talking calmly to the other officer. Ma'am, you called 911. Can you tell me what happened? Now that she was out of the car, now that the police were here, Eleanor's fear was evaporating. In its place came something worse. Reality. She looked at Marcus. Kind, professional Marcus, who'd driven her safely for 6 months, who'd never been anything but respectful, and saw him talking to a police officer because of her. Because she'd been afraid. Because she'd let her fear make the call instead of her reason. Eleanor's voice cracked. I thought there was an accident on the expressway. He took a different route and I didn't recognize it and I got scared. The officer's expression didn't change. Did he threaten you in any way? No. Did he touch you inappropriately? No. Did he say anything that made you feel unsafe? No, he didn't do anything. I panicked. The officer looked at her for a long moment. Eleanor couldn't read his expression, but she felt the judgment in it anyway. "Wait here," he said. He walked back to Marcus's side of the car. Eleanor watched as the two officers conferred, their voices too low to hear. Marcus sat perfectly still, his hands still on the wheel. After what felt like an eternity, the first officer returned. "Ma'am, your driver's record is clean. He's registered with the transportation company your family contracts with. His route tonight makes sense given the traffic conditions. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing." Eleanor nodded. She couldn't speak. "We're going to let you continue home now. Do you understand?" "Yes." The officer studied her face. "Ma'am, false reports are a serious matter. I'm not going to pursue this tonight, but I want you to think very carefully about what happened here. Do you understand?" "I understand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The officer nodded curtly and walked away. Both police cars pulled back onto the road, their lights still flashing, and then they were gone, disappearing into the darkness. Eleanor stood on the shoulder, her arms wrapped around herself. Marcus hadn't moved. Slowly, Eleanor walked back to the car and opened the rear door. She slid into her seat, closing the door quietly behind her. The silence was unbearable now. Marcus started the engine. His hands were steady on the wheel, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. He pulled back onto the road without a word. They drove the remaining 10 minutes in complete silence. No music this time. Just the sound of the engine and Eleanor's own heartbeat pounding in her ears. When they finally reached her house, Marcus pulled into the circular driveway and put the car in park. Eleanor sat frozen, in the back seat. Marcus got out, walked around to her door, and opened it the way he always did. Professional. Courteous. But he didn't look at her. Eleanor climbed out on shaking legs. "Marcus, Good night, Ms. Whitmore." His voice was flat, empty of everything that had made it warm before. He walked back to the driver's side, got in, and drove away. Eleanor stood in her driveway, watching the taillights disappear down the street, and felt the first hot tears slide down her cheeks. She'd done something terrible. She'd done something she couldn't take back. And she didn't know how to make it right. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment over and over again. The fear in the car, the phone call. Marcus's face when the police pulled him over. The way he'd looked through her instead of at her when he opened her door. By the time dawn light crept through her windows, Eleanor felt hollowed out. She forced herself to shower, to get dressed, to go through the motions of a normal morning. But nothing felt normal. Everything felt wrong, tainted by what she'd done. At 9 o'clock, her doorbell rang. Eleanor's heart leaped. Maybe it was Marcus. Maybe he'd come to talk, to let her explain, to... But when she opened the door, it was just Ruth, the housekeeper, arriving for her Thursday shift. "Morning, Miss Eleanor," Ruth said, stepping inside with her usual quiet efficiency. Ruth was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Morning, Ruth." Ruth paused, studying Eleanor's face. "You look tired. Everything all right?" "I'm fine." Ruth didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. She never did. Instead, she headed toward the kitchen to begin her work. Eleanor wandered into her home office and tried to focus on emails. But her mind wouldn't cooperate. Every few minutes, she found herself checking her phone, waiting for... what? An email from the transportation company? A text from Marcus? At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Marcus. Eleanor's breath caught when she opened the door and saw him standing there, still in his professional suit, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Whitmore." He nodded slightly. "I need to speak with you for a moment." "Yes, of course. Please, come in." Marcus stepped inside but didn't go any further than the entryway. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, shoulders straight, like he was reporting for duty. "I'm giving you my formal resignation, effective immediately," he said. His voice was calm, measured, professional. "I'll be happy to recommend other qualified drivers if you need a reference. My company will handle the transition." "No." The word burst out of Eleanor before she could stop it. "No, Marcus, please. I'm so sorry about last night. I was scared and I panicked and I should never have—" "Ms. Whitmore." Marcus's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "I appreciate your apology, but I can't continue working for you. I hope you understand." "I don't understand. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can move past this, can't we?" For the first time, something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Something that had been held back and was now straining against its restraints. "Move past it," he repeated quietly. "Ms. Whitmore, do you know what it's like to be pulled over by police when you haven't done anything wrong? Do you know what it's like to sit there, knowing that one wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, could change your whole life?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "No, I don't." "I do. I've known it since I was 16 years old. And last night, you put me in that situation because you were scared of me. Not because I threatened you. Not because I did anything wrong. Because of what I look like." "That's not—" Eleanor started, but the words died on her lips. Because it was true. She couldn't deny it. Marcus nodded slowly, like he'd expected her to have no answer. "I'm not angry, Miss Whitmore. I'm just done. I can't work for someone who sees me as a threat." "I won't. I have too much respect for myself." He turned toward the door. "Marcus, wait." He paused, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I am so sorry. You deserve better than what I did to you. You deserved better from me." Marcus's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "Thank you for saying that." Then he walked out the door, closing it quietly behind him. Eleanor stood in her entryway, tears streaming down her face, and felt the weight of what she'd lost. Not just a driver, but something more. The possibility of knowing someone, of being better than her fear, of being the person she'd always thought she was. She sank down onto the bottom step of her staircase and let herself cry. Ruth appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then sat down beside her on the step. They sat together in silence, and somehow that was exactly what Eleanor needed. The afternoon sun slanted through Eleanor's office windows, casting long shadows across her desk. She'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes without reading a single word. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Lunch tomorrow? The club at noon?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. She hadn't told her mother about Marcus yet. Hadn't told anyone really, except Ruth, who'd figured it out without Eleanor saying a word. She typed back, "Can't tomorrow. Busy with work." Another buzz, almost immediately. "Eleanor, you're always busy. I haven't seen you in 2 weeks." Eleanor set the phone down without responding. She couldn't face her mother right now. Couldn't sit across from her at the country club and pretend everything was fine while her mother asked polite questions about the gallery and made subtle comments about Eleanor's life choices. The doorbell rang. Eleanor frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Ruth had left an hour ago, and Eleanor had no appointment scheduled. She walked to the front door and opened it to find a man in a delivery uniform holding a clipboard. Eleanor Whitmore? Yes? I need you to sign for this. He handed her the clipboard and a thick envelope. Eleanor signed without thinking, took the envelope, and closed the door. The return address was from Premier Executive Transportation, the company Marcus worked for. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a formal letter explaining that due to the recent incident and Mr. Reed's resignation, they would be assigning her a new driver. However, there was a complication. Eleanor's mother had prepaid for a year of service as a birthday gift 6 months ago, and the contract stipulated that unless there was documented cause for termination, the assigned driver remained unchanged for the contract duration. Marcus was still technically assigned to her for another 6 months. The letter went on to explain that Mr. Reed had the right to refuse service, but doing so would require filing a formal complaint, which he had declined to do. The company was therefore in an awkward position. They were requesting that Eleanor either agree to reassign the contract, which would require her mother's signature as the contract holder, or confirm that Mr. Reed would continue service until a mutual agreement could be reached. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her mind racing. Marcus had refused to file a complaint. Even after what she'd done, even after she'd put him in danger, he'd chosen not to make it official. He could have. He could have reported her, made her face consequences, protected himself legally, but he hadn't. And now they were bound together by a contract neither of them wanted. Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed Premier Executive Transportation. Hello? Ms. Whitmore, this is Sandra Oakes from Premier Executive. I'm calling about the letter you should have just received. Yes, I have it. I want to apologize for this situation. It's highly unusual. Typically, we can resolve these matters quickly, but given the prepaid nature of your contract and Mr. Reed's decision not to file a formal complaint, we're in a bit of a bind. I understand. Mr. Reed has agreed to fulfill his professional obligations through the end of this week while we sort out the paperwork. That gives you 5 more days to make arrangements with your mother regarding the contract reassignment. Does that work for you? 5 more days. 5 more days of seeing Marcus, of facing what she'd done, of sitting in that car with the silence between them. Yes, Eleanor heard herself say. That works. Excellent. Mr. Reed will resume his regular schedule tomorrow morning. He'll pick you up at 8 for your gallery appointment, correct? Correct. Thank you for your patience, Ms. Whitmore. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. Eleanor stood in her hallway, holding the phone, feeling like the walls were closing in around her. She had 5 more days with Marcus. 5 more days to face what she'd done. 5 more days to sit with her shame and his dignity, and the vast, unbridgeable distance between them. She should call her mother right now, should explain the situation, or at least part of it, and get the contract reassigned immediately. That would be the easy solution, the clean break. But something stopped her. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a desire to prove she wasn't the person who'd made that phone call. Maybe it was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite name. Whatever it was, Eleanor decided she would face those 5 days. She would sit in that car with Marcus and feel every uncomfortable moment. She would earn her discomfort. It was the least she could do. The next morning, Eleanor woke before her alarm. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple gray dress and pearl earrings. Professional, respectful, not trying too hard. At exactly 8 o'clock, the black sedan pulled into her driveway. Eleanor's heart hammered as she walked outside. Marcus stood beside the car, wearing his usual dark suit, his expression carefully blank. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was polite, nothing more. "Good morning, Marcus." He opened the back door. Eleanor slid inside, and the door closed with a soft click that felt like a prison gate locking. Marcus got into the driver's seat, adjusted his mirror. Their eyes didn't meet this time, and pulled out of the driveway. The silence in the car was suffocating. Eleanor searched for something to say, some way to break through the wall between them, but every word that came to mind felt wrong, inadequate, like trying to patch a bullet hole with a Band-Aid. They drove through her neighborhood, past the perfect lawns and the perfect houses where perfect families lived perfect lives. Eleanor had never felt less perfect in her life. "Marcus," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you don't want to talk to me. I understand that, but I need you to know that I'm grateful you're willing to finish the week. I know it can't be easy for you." Marcus's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting hers for just a second before looking back at the road. "It's my job, Ms. Whitmore." 4 words: professional, distant, final. Eleanor nodded, even though he couldn't see her anymore. "I understand." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they arrived at the gallery, Marcus parked at the curb and came around to open her door. Eleanor climbed out, careful not to brush against him, careful to maintain the distance he'd established. "I'll be here when you're ready," Marcus said. "Thank you." She watched him walk back to the driver's side and get in. Through the tinted windows, she could barely see his silhouette. Eleanor turned and walked into the gallery, but her mind stayed in that car, trapped in the silence she'd created. The gallery meeting was a blur. Eleanor smiled and nodded and said intelligent things about brushstrokes and composition and emerging artists, but her heart wasn't in it. Her heart was somewhere else entirely, sitting in the cold space between her and Marcus. When the meeting ended, she texted Marcus that she was ready. By the time she walked outside, he was already there, door open, waiting. The drive home was just as silent as the drive there. That evening, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table while Ruth prepared dinner. Ruth moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, chopping vegetables, stirring a pot on the stove, humming softly to herself. "Ruth," Eleanor said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" Ruth looked up from her cutting board. "Of course." How do you forgive someone who's hurt you? Really hurt you?" Ruth set down her knife. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and came to sit across from Eleanor at the table. "That's a heavy question," Ruth said gently. "Who hurt you, honey?" "I'm not the one who got hurt. I'm the one who did the hurting." Ruth's expression shifted, understanding dawning in her eyes. "This is about Marcus." Eleanor nodded, tears pricking at her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this, Ruth. I apologized, but it's not enough. Nothing I say feels like enough." "That's because saying sorry isn't the same as being sorry." Eleanor looked up. "What do you mean?" Ruth leaned back in her chair, her eyes kind but firm. "Words are easy, Eleanor. Anyone can say them. But being sorry, really being sorry, means changing. It means looking at what you did and understanding why you did it, then doing the hard work to make sure you never do it again." "I was scared," Eleanor whispered. "I know that's not an excuse, but I was so scared in that car, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling." "Scared of what?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "Scared of him, of Marcus, of being alone with him in the dark." "Why?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "Because," Eleanor's voice broke, "because he's black. Because I've been taught to be afraid, even though no one ever said it directly. Because I grew up with warnings and stories and news reports and all these subtle messages about who's dangerous and who's safe. And in that moment, in that car, all of that programming just took over." Ruth nodded slowly. "At least you're being honest about it now." But what do I do with that? How do I change something that's been inside me my whole life? One choice at a time, Ruth said. You can't undo what happened. You can't take back that phone call. But you can choose to be different tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. You can choose to sit with your discomfort instead of running from it. You can choose to listen instead of assuming. You can choose to see people, really see them, instead of seeing your fear. Eleanor wiped at her eyes. Marcus won't forgive me. I don't think he should. Maybe he won't, Ruth agreed. But that's his choice to make, not yours. Your job isn't to make him forgive you. Your job is to become the kind of person who deserves forgiveness, whether you get it or not. The words settled over Eleanor like a weight. Heavy, but somehow right. Thank you, Ruth. Ruth reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. You're not a bad person, Eleanor, but you did a bad thing. There's a difference. The question is what you're going to do about it. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Marcus arrived exactly on time, opened her door, drove her where she needed to go, said nothing beyond what was professionally necessary, and Eleanor sat in the back seat, learning to live with the silence. She didn't try to force conversation, didn't make excuses or offer more apologies. She just sat with her discomfort, let it become familiar, let it teach her what Ruth had said, that words weren't enough. That change came from somewhere deeper. On the 4th day, something shifted. They were driving back from a client meeting, stuck in afternoon traffic, when Eleanor's phone rang. Her mother's name flashed on the screen. Eleanor hesitated, then answered. Hi, Mom. Eleanor, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you avoiding me? No, I've just been busy. Too busy for your mother? That's not like you, darling. Eleanor watched the traffic lights change from red to green. What did you need, Mom? I wanted to talk about the foundation gala next month. I need you there, Eleanor. Everyone will be expecting you. I'll check my calendar. It's not a request, Eleanor. You're on the planning committee. You made a commitment. Eleanor closed her eyes. The gala, the same event every year, filled with the same people having the same conversations about money and status and who was dating whom. The thought of it made her feel exhausted. I'll be there, Mom. Good. And bring a date, would you? Daniel asked about you last week. He seems interested in reconciling. Eleanor's eyes flew open. Daniel? Mom, we broke up 8 months ago. I know, dear, but he's such a good match for you. Good family, good prospects. Your father always liked him. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Daniel, charming, successful Daniel, who'd spent their entire relationship making her feel small, who'd dismissed her opinions, controlled her schedule, made decisions without asking her input, who'd broken up with her when she'd finally stood up for herself. I'm not getting back together with Daniel. Don't be stubborn, Eleanor. You're 28 years old. It's time to start thinking seriously about your future. In the front seat, Marcus's shoulders had gone rigid. He was listening, Eleanor realized, hearing every word of this conversation. Something inside Eleanor shifted. Mom, I need to go. Eleanor, we're not done talking about this. Yes, we are. I'll call you later. Eleanor hung up before her mother could respond. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From something else. Anger, maybe? Or clarity. The silence in the car felt different now. Less heavy, more shared. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Eleanor said quietly. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 4 days, his expression wasn't completely blank. There was something almost like understanding in his eyes. Family can be complicated, he said. 4 words again, but different ones this time. Softer ones. They can, Eleanor agreed. They drove the rest of the way home in silence, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It was something gentler, something that felt almost like the beginning of understanding. That evening, Eleanor made a decision. She picked up her phone and called her mother back. Eleanor, thank goodness. I was worried you'd hung up angry. I need to talk to you about something, Mom. Of course, dear. What is it? Eleanor took a deep breath. I need you to reassign my transportation contract. A pause. Why? Is something wrong with your driver? No, something's wrong with me. Another pause, longer this time. I don't understand. I made a mistake, Mom. A bad one. And I need to face the consequences of that mistake. Part of that is making sure Marcus, my driver, doesn't have to keep working for me. Marcus, you're on a first-name basis with your driver? Eleanor heard the judgment in her mother's voice, the subtle disapproval, and for the first time, she didn't let it affect her. Yes, Mom, he's a person, a good person, and I treated him badly. So I'm asking you to please sign the paperwork to reassign the contract. Eleanor, I don't know what this is about, but, Mom, Eleanor's voice was firm. Please, just do this for me. A long silence stretched between them. Fine, her mother finally said. Send me the paperwork. I'll sign it. Thank you. After Eleanor hung up, she sat in her living room and felt something she hadn't felt in days. Relief. Not because she was free from Marcus. Not because she could move on and forget what happened. But because she'd made a choice. A real choice. To let him go. To stop forcing him into a situation neither of them wanted. It was a small thing. A tiny step toward becoming the person Ruth had described. Someone who deserved forgiveness, whether she received it or not. Eleanor opened her laptop and wrote an email to the transportation company, explaining that her mother would be signing the reassignment paperwork and that tomorrow would be Marcus's last day. Her finger hovered over the send button. Tomorrow, one more day. One more chance to sit with her discomfort. To show Marcus through her silence and her respect that she was learning, that she was trying. Eleanor hit send. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her house, preparing herself for what came next. The last morning came too quickly. Eleanor woke with a knot in her stomach, knowing this would be the final time Marcus pulled into her driveway. The final time she'd see his professional courtesy, his careful distance, his dignity that never wavered, even when she'd given him every reason to let it crack. She dressed in a simple navy dress, minimal jewelry. Her hands trembled as she applied her makeup, and she had to start over twice when her mascara smudged. At 8 o'clock exactly, the black sedan appeared. Eleanor grabbed her purse and walked outside. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and autumn leaves. Marcus stood by the car, straight-backed and composed as always. Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. Good morning, Marcus. He opened the door. Eleanor slid inside, her heart heavy with all the things she wanted to say, but couldn't find the words for. Marcus got into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror. For just a moment, their eyes met in the reflection. Eleanor tried to communicate something through that brief glance, gratitude, regret, respect. But she didn't know if he saw any of it. They pulled out of the driveway and into the morning traffic. Eleanor had no meetings today, no appointments. She'd asked Marcus to drive her to the gallery anyway, just to have somewhere to go. Just to have this last hour with him, even if it was spent in silence. But as they drove through her neighborhood, past the familiar streets and houses, Eleanor realized she didn't want silence anymore. Not today. not when this was their last chance. "Marcus," she said softly, "I know you don't want to talk to me, and I respect that. But would it be okay if I just said some things? You don't have to respond. I just need you to hear them." Marcus's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded. Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I've spent this whole week thinking about what happened, about why I made that call. And I've realized something. I was taught to be afraid. Not by anyone saying it directly, but through 1,000 small moments. 1,000 warnings and assumptions and stories. And I never questioned any of it. I just accepted it as truth." She watched the back of Marcus's head, looking for any sign that he was listening. "When I got scared in the car that night, it wasn't really about you. It was about all those messages I'd absorbed, all those fears I'd never examined. And I let those fears control me instead of seeing the person you actually are." Marcus's shoulders shifted slightly, but he didn't speak. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Eleanor continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I don't deserve that, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure I never do anything like that again. Not to you, not to anyone." The car stopped at a red light. In the silence, Eleanor could hear her own breathing, rapid and uneven. "You handled everything with so much grace," she whispered. "Even when you had every right to be angry. Even when I gave you every reason to make this ugly, you stayed dignified. You stayed professional. And that taught me more than any apology I could offer you." The light turned green. Marcus pressed the accelerator, and they moved forward again. "Thank you," Eleanor said finally. "Thank you for this week, for letting me sit with what I did, for not making it easy for me. I needed that." They drove the rest of the way to the gallery in silence, but it felt different now. Lighter somehow, like something had been released into the air between them. When they arrived, Marcus parked and came around to open Eleanor's door. She stepped out, and for the first time all week, Marcus looked at her directly, really looked at her. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I appreciate what you said." Eleanor's breath caught. "You do?" "I do, and I want you to know something too." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not angry with you. I was at first, but I've had some time to think too. What you did was wrong. But I've seen people react to their fear in much worse ways. You owned it. You didn't make excuses. That matters." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. "It doesn't fix what I did." "No," Marcus agreed. "It doesn't. But it's a start." They stood there on the sidewalk, the morning sun warm on their faces, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation, but understanding. Mutual recognition of each other's humanity. "I hope you have a good life, Ms. Whitmore." "Eleanor," she said. "Please, just call me Eleanor." A small smile touched Marcus's lips, the first smile she'd seen from him in a week. "Eleanor. I hope you have a good life too, Marcus. You deserve it." He nodded once, then walked back to the car. Eleanor watched him drive away, watched the black sedan disappear into traffic, and felt the weight of the past week settle into something she could carry. She turned and walked into the gallery, knowing this chapter was closed, knowing she'd never see Marcus again, but knowing, too, that she was different now. Changed by what had happened, changed by his grace and her shame, and the hard work of looking at herself honestly. It wasn't redemption, but it was growth, and that would have to be enough. 2 days later, Eleanor sat in her mother's pristine living room, a cup of tea growing cold on the table in front of her. Helen Whitmore sat across from her, perfectly coiffed and composed, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her mother's house always felt like a museum, beautiful but untouchable, every surface gleaming, every pillow precisely placed. "So," Helen said, setting down her own teacup with a delicate click, "are you going to tell me what this is really about?" Eleanor had known this conversation was coming, had prepared for it even, but now that the moment was here, the words stuck in her throat. "I told you, Mom. I just needed a change." Helen's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Eleanor, you don't change drivers over needing a change. Something happened. I can tell." Eleanor looked at her mother, really looked at her. At the woman who'd raised her with careful lessons about appearance and propriety. Who'd taught her to smile at everyone but trust no one. Who'd spent Eleanor's whole childhood issuing subtle warnings wrapped in concern. "Be careful, Eleanor. You never know about people. Lock your car doors when you drive through that neighborhood." "I'm not racist, dear. I'm just realistic." Eleanor had absorbed all of it, had let it shape her worldview without ever questioning whether it was right. "Mom," Eleanor said slowly, "have you ever been wrong about someone? Really wrong?" Helen frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "An important one. Have you ever judged someone unfairly because of how they looked or where they came from?" "Eleanor, I don't know what this is about, but I don't appreciate the implication." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking." Helen set her cup down harder this time, the china rattling. "If you have something to say, just say it." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I made a terrible mistake. I let fear control me, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Someone who was only ever professional and kind. And I've spent this whole week realizing that fear came from you, from things you taught me without meaning to." Her mother's face hardened. "That's not fair, Eleanor." "Isn't it? How many times did you warn me about being careful around certain people? How many times did you make comments about neighborhoods or crime or who I should trust? You never said it directly, but the message was always there. I was trying to protect you." "From what, Mom? From living in the real world? From seeing people as individuals instead of stereotypes?" Helen stood up, her movements sharp with anger. "I raised you to be smart, to be safe. If that makes me a villain in your eyes, then so be it." Eleanor stood, too, facing her mother across the coffee table. "You're not a villain, Mom, but you are scared. You've been scared your whole life, and you taught me to be scared too, and I'm done with that. I'm done letting fear make my decisions." "This is about that driver, isn't it?" Helen's voice was cold now. "What did he say to you? Did he try to—" "He didn't do anything." Eleanor cut her off. "That's the point. He never did anything wrong. I was the one who messed up, and I'm trying to be better." Helen stared at her daughter for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she walked to the window, looking out at her perfectly manicured garden. "Your father used to say I worried too much," she said quietly. "He said I saw danger everywhere, even when there wasn't any. I told him he didn't understand what it was like to be responsible for keeping you safe." Eleanor's anger softened slightly. "Dad was right, though. You do see danger everywhere." "Maybe I do, but I kept you safe, didn't I? You grew up healthy and happy and protected." "Protected from what, Mom? From the world? From people who might have enriched my life if I'd given them a chance?" Helen turned from the window, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something vulnerable in her mother's eyes. "I did the best I could, Eleanor. I raised you the way I was raised. I thought I was doing right by you. I know you did." Eleanor said, her voice gentler now. But that doesn't mean it was right. We can love each other and still acknowledge that some of the things we learned were wrong, that we need to do better. Her mother sat back down, suddenly looking older than her 58 years. I don't know how to change something that's been part of me for so long. Eleanor sat beside her, taking her mother's hand. One choice at a time. That's what someone told me. You can't undo the past, but you can choose to be different in the future. They sat together in silence, mother and daughter, both wrestling with uncomfortable truths. Finally, Helen squeezed Eleanor's hand. I'll try. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I'll try. It wasn't everything Eleanor had hoped for, but it was something. It was a start. 3 weeks passed. Eleanor fell into a new routine with her new driver, a quiet woman named Patricia who was pleasant but unremarkable. The drives were fine, professional, uneventful, and Eleanor hated every minute of them. Not because of Patricia, but because every time she got into that car, she thought about Marcus, about his calm presence, his quiet dignity, the way he'd handled her worst moment with such grace. She wondered where he was now, what routes he was driving, if he ever thought about her. She wondered if he'd forgiven her, or if some wounds took longer to heal than 3 weeks. Eleanor threw herself into work, taking on new clients, staying late at the gallery, filling her days so full that she didn't have time to think. But at night, alone in her too-big house, the thoughts caught up with her anyway. Ruth noticed, of course. Ruth always noticed. You're running, Ruth said one afternoon, folding laundry in Eleanor's bedroom while Eleanor sorted through work emails on her laptop. I'm working. You're running, Ruth repeated. From what? I'm not sure, but you're definitely running. Eleanor closed her laptop with a sigh. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Ruth. I apologized. I changed. I stood up to my mother. What else is there? That depends. Are you running from your guilt or from something else? What else would I be running from? Ruth gave her a knowing look. Only you can answer that, honey. Eleanor frowned, not understanding. But before she could ask what Ruth meant, her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Eleanor Whitmore? A man's voice, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Caleb Reed, Marcus's brother. Eleanor's heart stopped. Is Marcus okay? He's fine, but I need to talk to you. Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere public? Eleanor's mind raced. Why would Marcus's brother want to meet her? Of course. When? Tomorrow afternoon. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street near the old courthouse. Do you know it? I can find it. 2 o'clock? I'll be there. Good. And Eleanor? His voice was serious, protective. Marcus doesn't know I'm calling you, so don't mention it to him if you see him. I won't, Eleanor promised, even though the likelihood of seeing Marcus seemed impossibly small. The line went dead. Eleanor sat on her bed, phone still in her hand, her heart pounding. Marcus's brother wanted to meet her. But why? Ruth watched from the doorway, her expression thoughtful. Everything okay? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. I really don't know. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place Eleanor would never normally go to. Small, slightly worn, filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of strong coffee. It was the opposite of the pristine cafes near the gallery, and Eleanor felt out of place the moment she walked in. Caleb Reed sat at a corner table, watching the door. He looked like Marcus. Same tall build, same strong features, but older, with silver threading through his hair and harder lines around his eyes. Eleanor approached the table nervously. Caleb? He nodded, gesturing to the seat across from him. Thanks for coming. Eleanor sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Is Marcus really okay? He's fine, physically anyway. Caleb studied her with an intensity that made Eleanor want to squirm. I wanted to meet you because I needed to see for myself what kind of person you are. I don't understand. Marcus told me what happened. About the call, about the police, about the week you two spent barely speaking. Caleb leaned forward. He also told me about your last conversation, about what you said to him. Eleanor's throat tightened. I meant every word. I believe you did, but here's what I need to know. Are you the kind of person who apologizes and moves on? Or are you the kind of person who actually changes? I'm trying to change. Every day. That's good, Caleb said. Because my brother is hurting, and I need to know if you're worth that hurt. Eleanor's eyes widened. I don't understand. Why would Marcus be hurting? He doesn't owe me anything. He shouldn't even be thinking about me. Caleb's expression softened slightly. That's the problem, isn't it? He shouldn't be. But he is. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. What do you mean? I mean my brother can't stop talking about you. About how you owned your mistake. About how you didn't make excuses. About how you sat with your shame instead of running from it. Caleb shook his head. I told him he was crazy. Told him to forget about you and move on. But Marcus has always been stubborn. Eleanor couldn't breathe. He talks about me? Too much, and I can see why, now that I've met you. Caleb's eyes were sharp, but not unkind. You're not what I expected. I thought you'd be defensive, self-righteous, making excuses for what you did. But you're not, are you? No, I can't. What I did was wrong. Most people can't admit that. Most people would have blamed Marcus somehow. Found a way to make it his fault. Caleb paused. Marcus told me you stood up to your mother, that you asked her to reassign the contract, even though it meant admitting what happened. How does he know that? The transportation company told him. They had to explain why the contract was being terminated. Eleanor felt exposed, vulnerable. I did what I should have done in the first place. Let him go. Maybe. Or maybe you let him go because you thought that's what he wanted. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Did you ever ask him what he wanted? He made it clear he didn't want to work for me anymore. He resigned. He resigned because he had to protect himself, because staying in that situation hurt his dignity. But that doesn't mean he wanted to never see you again. Eleanor's hands trembled. Why are you telling me this? Because Marcus won't. Because he's too proud and too hurt and too scared of being wrong about you. Caleb's voice was firm. But I love my brother. And I've watched him go through his life keeping everyone at arm's length, never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. And then you came along and hurt him anyway. But somehow, instead of pushing you away completely, he's thinking about you, wondering about you, hoping, maybe, that the person you showed him in those last conversations was real. Tears burned in Eleanor's eyes. It is real. I promise you, it's real. Then prove it, not to me, to him. How? He doesn't want to see me. Caleb pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. Marcus volunteers every Saturday morning at a community center on the east side, teaching kids how to play chess. He's there from 9 to noon. Eleanor stared at the address written on the paper. I'm not saying you should go there, Caleb continued. I'm not saying you should show up and declare your feelings or make some grand gesture. But if you want a chance to show Marcus who you really are, not as his employer, not as someone apologizing, but as a person, then maybe you should be there, as yourself. No agenda. Just there. Eleanor picked up the paper with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? Because I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looked when he talked about you. Even angry, even hurt. There was something there. Something real. And Marcus deserves real. He deserves someone who sees him, all of him, and chooses him anyway. Caleb stood up. The question is whether you're brave enough to be that person. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts and the address burning a hole in her palm. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of November day that promised rain, but hadn't delivered yet. Eleanor stood outside the community center on the east side of the city, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The building was old brick, weathered, but cared for, with bright murals painted on the walls depicting children playing and learning. Through the windows, Eleanor could see people moving around inside. Families, teenagers, elderly folks. This was a place that served its community, that opened its doors to everyone. Eleanor had never been to this part of the city before, had never had a reason to come here. The realization made her ashamed. She'd spent the past week debating whether to come at all. Part of her thought Caleb was wrong, that showing up would only make things worse. That Marcus had moved on and she should respect that by staying away. But a louder part, the part that had been growing stronger since that night in the car, told her that running away wasn't growth, that real change meant being brave enough to show up, even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable. So here she was. Eleanor took a deep breath and walked inside. The lobby was warm and bustling. A bulletin board near the door advertised everything from ESL classes to diabetes screenings to a Thanksgiving food drive. The air smelled like coffee and old books and the particular scent of a building filled with people. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. Can I help you? I'm looking for the chess program. Heard it meets on Saturday mornings. Sure does. Down the hall, last door on the right. They've already started, but you're welcome to go in and watch. Thank you. Eleanor walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the tile floor. She could hear voices coming from the room at the end. Children's laughter, adult voices giving gentle instruction, the click of chess pieces being moved across boards. She stopped outside the door, suddenly terrified. What was she doing here? What would Marcus think when he saw her? Would he be angry? Embarrassed? Would he ask her to leave? Before she could talk herself into turning around, a small voice spoke up beside her. Are you going to chess club? Eleanor looked down to find a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with dark braids and curious eyes, standing next to her holding a worn chess set. I'm not sure. You should come. Mr. Marcus is the best teacher. He's really patient, and he never makes you feel bad when you mess up. The little girl beamed. I'm Jasmine. What's your name? Eleanor. That's a pretty name. Come on. Jasmine grabbed Eleanor's hand with the confidence only a child could have and pulled her into the room. The space was larger than Eleanor expected, with several folding tables set up throughout. At each table, children sat across from adult volunteers, chessboards between them. Some games were in progress, some were being reset. The energy in the room was focused but joyful. And there, at a table near the window, sat Marcus. He was bent over a board, showing a young boy, maybe 10 years old, how a knight moved. His voice was patient, warm, completely different from the professional tone he'd used with Eleanor. He looked relaxed here, at ease in a way she'd never seen before. He looked happy. Eleanor's breath caught in her chest. Marcus glanced up then, probably sensing someone watching him. His eyes met Eleanor's across the room, Every expression flashed across his face in quick succession: surprise, confusion, something that might have been hope, then wariness. He said something to the boy at his table, then stood up and walked over. Jasmine still had hold of Eleanor's hand. "Mr. Marcus, I brought a new person. Her name is Eleanor, and she wants to learn chess." Marcus looked at Jasmine, then at Eleanor, then back at Jasmine. A small smile touched his lips. "Thank you, Jasmine. That's very thoughtful of you. Why don't you go set up your board with Miss Angela? I'll be right there." "Okay." Jasmine bounced off to another table, leaving Eleanor and Marcus standing alone near the doorway. The silence stretched between them, different from the silence in the car, but heavy all the same. "Eleanor," Marcus said finally. His voice was neutral, careful. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I know. I'm sorry if I'm intruding. I can leave if you want me to." "How did you know I'd be here?" Eleanor hesitated. "Your brother told me." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Caleb called you?" "He wanted to meet me, to make sure I wasn't... I don't know, to make sure I was worth your time, I think." Something flickered in Marcus's expression. He had no right to do that. "Maybe not, but I'm glad he did." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "I've been thinking about you, Marcus, about our last conversation, about everything that happened, and I realized I never asked you something important." "What's that?" "If you were okay, if you're okay now?" Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Around them, the chess games continued, children laughing and volunteers encouraging. The normal sounds of a Saturday morning, while Eleanor's whole world seemed to pause. "I'm okay," Marcus said quietly. "It's been an adjustment, but I'm okay." "Good. That's good." Another pause. "Why are you really here, Eleanor?" Eleanor looked around the room, at the children focused on their boards, at the volunteers giving their time, at the community that Marcus was part of. A community she'd never known existed. A world she'd never thought to look for. "I'm here because I want to be better than I was," she said honestly. "I want to understand the world outside my bubble. I want to see what you see. And I'm here because..." She met his eyes. "Because I wanted to see you. Not as your employer. Not as someone apologizing. Just as Eleanor, if that's okay." Marcus was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might ask her to leave after all. Then he smiled, small but real. "There's an empty table over there," he said, gesturing to a spot near the back. "You know how to play chess?" "Not really. My father taught me the basics when I was young, but I haven't played in years." "Then you came to the right place." Marcus's smile widened slightly. "Let me finish helping David with his game, then I'll show you some moves." Eleanor's heart soared. "Really?" "Really, but fair warning, I don't go easy on beginners." "I wouldn't expect you to." Marcus walked back to his table with David, and Eleanor made her way to the empty table in the back. She sat down, pulled off her coat, and waited. Around her, the chess games continued. Eleanor watched the children, saw how they studied their boards with such focus, how they celebrated when they made good moves and groaned when they made mistakes. She watched the volunteers, too, people of all ages and backgrounds, giving their time to teach something beautiful to the next generation. This was Marcus's world. These were his people, and he'd invited her into it, even after everything. Eleanor felt like she might cry from the sheer grace of it. After about 15 minutes, Marcus came over and sat down across from her. He set up the chess pieces with practiced efficiency, white pieces on Eleanor's side, black on his own. "Okay," he said. "Show me what you remember." Eleanor touched each piece, naming them as she went. Pawn, rook, knight, bishop, queen, king. Good. Now show me how they move. For the next hour, Marcus taught Eleanor chess. He was patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she got something right, and he pushed her to think strategically without making her feel stupid. It was clear he loved teaching, loved watching someone's mind work through a problem. They played a game, Marcus obviously letting her win, but not making it obvious. When she finally checkmated his king, he smiled and nodded. Not bad for someone who hasn't played in years. You let me win. Maybe a little. But you earned some of those moves. You're thinking ahead. That's the most important part. Eleanor looked at the board, at the pieces scattered between them. Marcus, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you say yes? When I showed up here, you could have asked me to leave. You could have told me you'd moved on. But you didn't. Why? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Honestly, I've been asking myself the same question. After what happened, I should want nothing to do with you. I should have written you off completely. But you didn't. No, I didn't. He paused, choosing his words carefully. That last conversation we had, outside the gallery. You said something that stuck with me. You said I handled everything with grace. That I taught you something by staying dignified. Eleanor nodded, remembering. Nobody's ever said anything like that to me before, Marcus continued. Usually, when something like this happens, and it has happened before, not exactly like this, but similar, people either ignore it, or they get defensive, or they make it about them. But you didn't do any of that. You saw what you did, you owned it, and then you did the hard work of sitting with it instead of running away. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Eleanor. You could have made a dozen different choices. You could have blamed me, convinced yourself I actually did something. Wrong. You could have complained to the company, tried to get me fired. You could have just signed that paperwork and never thought about it again. But you didn't. You chose to sit with your discomfort. You chose to learn from it. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. That doesn't erase what I did. No, it doesn't, but it shows who you want to be, and that matters. Marcus leaned forward. I've spent a lot of time thinking about trust, about how it breaks and whether it can be rebuilt, and I've realized something. Trust isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them. So, you trust me? I don't know yet, Marcus admitted. But I'm willing to find out, if you are. Eleanor's heart felt like it might burst. I am. I absolutely am. Around them, the chess program was winding down. Parents were arriving to pick up their children. Volunteers were packing up boards and saying their goodbyes. Jasmine bounced over to their table. Miss Eleanor, did you learn how to play? I did. Mr. Marcus is a great teacher. I told you. Jasmine grinned at Marcus. Are you coming back next week, Miss Eleanor? Eleanor looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. He smiled. You're welcome to, if you want. I want to, Eleanor said, if that's okay with everyone here. We can always use more volunteers, Marcus said, especially ones who are willing to learn. Jasmine's mother called for her then, and the little girl skipped away, waving goodbye. Eleanor and Marcus stood up, and Marcus started packing up their chess set. Can I ask you something now? Marcus said, as he placed pieces carefully in their box. Of course. Why chess? Why not just call me, text me? Why come here? Eleanor thought about how to answer that. Because I didn't want to ask you to come to my world. I wanted to come to yours. I wanted to see what you care about, who you are when you're not being professional Marcus the driver. I wanted to see the real you. And what do you see? Eleanor looked around the community center, at the faces of all different shades and ages, at the bulletin board full of resources, at the worn but loved furniture, at the mural on the wall showing children holding hands. I see someone who gives back, someone who cares about his community, someone who makes a difference in quiet, important ways. She met Marcus's eyes. I see someone I'd like to know better, if you'll let me. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. I'm Marcus Reed. Nice to meet you. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. I'm Eleanor Whitmore. Nice to meet you too. They shook hands like strangers meeting for the first time. In a way, they were. Over the next month, Eleanor became a regular at Saturday Chess Club. She learned the names of the kids: Jasmine, David, Miguel, Keisha, Jordan. She learned about their lives, their families, their dreams. She learned that Miguel wanted to be a doctor, that Keisha was amazing at math, that Jordan had just moved to the city and was shy but brilliant once you got him talking. She also learned about the other volunteers, Miss Angela, who worked as a nurse during the week, Mr. Thomas, who'd been playing chess since he was 5 and had stories about every opening move, Mrs. Chen, who brought homemade cookies every Saturday and whose grandchildren had all learned chess at this very center. Eleanor was the only white person in the room most Saturdays. She noticed it, of course, but no one treated her differently because of it. They welcomed her, taught her, included her in their community with the same warmth they showed everyone else. It was humbling, educational, transformative, and through it all, Marcus was there. They didn't talk about that night, didn't rehash what had happened or analyze Eleanor's growth or discuss forgiveness. Instead, they talked about chess strategies and the kids' progress and whether the center needed new boards. They talked about normal things, building something new on top of the ruins of what had been. Sometimes, between lessons, they'd play each other. Marcus still won most of the time, but Eleanor was getting better. Learning to think several moves ahead. Learning patience and strategy. Learning trust. On the last Saturday before Thanksgiving, after all the kids had left and the other volunteers were cleaning up, Marcus asked Eleanor if she wanted to get coffee. There's a good place around the corner, he said. Nothing fancy, but the coffee's strong and the owner makes the best apple pie in the city. Eleanor's heart jumped. I'd like that. They walked together through the neighborhood, past small shops and restaurants, past murals and community gardens. Marcus pointed out landmarks, the bodega where he bought his morning coffee, the library where he'd spent countless afternoons as a kid, the park where he and Caleb used to play basketball. This was his world, and he was sharing it with her. The coffee shop was small and warm, with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Marcus was right. The apple pie was incredible. They sat by the window, watching people walk by, and talked about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about the gallery, about her difficult clients and the art she loved. Marcus told her about the other jobs he'd had before driving, teaching English overseas, working at a nonprofit, trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. So, driving isn't your dream job? Eleanor asked. Marcus smiled. Driving is fine. It pays well, gives me flexible hours so I can volunteer. But my dream? I want to run my own community center someday. A place like where we teach chess, but bigger. With programs for kids and seniors, job training, health services, arts classes, a real community hub. That sounds amazing. It's a big dream. Would take a lot of money, a lot of planning. But yeah, that's what I want. Eleanor stirred her coffee, thinking. Have you ever written a grant proposal? A few times. Haven't had much luck. I know people who fund that kind of thing. Through the gallery, through my family's foundation. I could introduce you if you want. Not as a favor. just as a connection. You'd still have to do all the work, write the proposals, make the pitch. But I could get you in the door. Marcus looked at her carefully. That's generous. It's fair. You've been generous with me. Teaching me chess, letting me be part of your community. This is just me sharing what I have access to. I'll think about it, Marcus said. Thank you. They finished their coffee and pie, and Marcus walked Eleanor to her car. She'd started driving herself to the community center, another small step toward independence. When they reached her car, Eleanor turned to face him. Marcus, can I ask you something? And I want you to be honest. Okay. Do you think you'll ever be able to fully forgive me? For what I did? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. I think I already have, Eleanor. Not because you earned it, or because enough time has passed, but because holding on to it was hurting me more than you, and I realized that what you did, that was about you, about your fears and your journey. But forgiveness is about me, about choosing peace over pain. Eleanor felt tears well up. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but I'm not giving it to you for your sake. I'm giving it to myself. He smiled gently. Besides, the person who called 911 that night, I don't think she exists anymore. The person standing in front of me now is someone different. Someone who showed up. Someone who did the work. That person deserves a fresh start. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. Marcus reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. A simple touch, but it felt like everything. See you next Saturday? He asked. Definitely. Eleanor drove home through the city, past neighborhoods she was starting to recognize, past the old courthouse and the murals and the community center that had become her second home. She thought about Marcus's words, about forgiveness and fresh starts and becoming someone new. She wasn't the same person who'd made that phone call. She was someone who'd faced her fear, examined its roots, and chosen to grow past it. Someone who showed up, even when it was hard. Someone who was learning that real change happened slowly, in small choices made over and over again. She was Eleanor, just Eleanor. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Christmas arrived with unexpected warmth. Eleanor spent Christmas Eve with her mother, navigating the careful detente they'd established. Helen was trying, not perfectly, but genuinely, to question her own assumptions. They still disagreed sometimes, still had moments of tension. But there was respect now, and honesty and love without conditions. On Christmas morning, Eleanor volunteered at a community meal the center was hosting. Marcus was there too, along with dozens of other volunteers, serving turkey and mashed potatoes to families who needed a warm meal and a place to belong. Eleanor ladled gravy, wiped down tables, and listened to stories from people whose lives were nothing like hers. She felt useful, connected, part of something bigger than herself. After the meal, as they were cleaning up, Marcus came over to where Eleanor was stacking chairs. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas. I have something for you. It's small, but..." He pulled a wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "I thought you might like it." Eleanor took the package with trembling hands. Inside was a small wooden chess piece, a queen, beautifully carved from dark wood. "It's gorgeous," Eleanor breathed. "My grandfather made it. He was a woodworker. He made this whole set, piece by piece, and gave it to me when I was 10. This was always my favorite piece." "Marcus, I can't take this. It's too special." "I want you to have it, as a reminder that you're stronger than you think, that you can move in any direction, protect what matters, and change the whole game if you're brave enough." Eleanor clutched the queen to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. For this. For everything. For giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one." "You did deserve it, Eleanor. You just had to believe that yourself." They stood there in the community center, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas dinner, and Eleanor felt something shift. Something that had been tentative and careful and cautious blooming into something more. "Marcus," she said softly, "would you want to get dinner sometime? Not coffee, not chess, just dinner, the two of us." Marcus's smile was slow and warm and filled with hope. "Like a date?" "Like a date." He pretended to think about it, his eyes twinkling. "I think I could be convinced, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "You have to let me win at chess at least once in a while." Eleanor laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "No promises." "Then I guess we'll have to play a lot of games to find out." "I guess we will." They stood there grinning at each other like teenagers, and Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. They still had work to do, building trust, navigating differences, learning each other's stories and scars. There would be hard conversations ahead, moments of doubt, times when Eleanor's old fears might resurface, or when Marcus's guard might go back up. But they had something real, something worth fighting for, something built on accountability and dignity and the brave choice to show up, even when it hurt. They had a beginning, and that was enough. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the doorway of Marcus's apartment, holding a bottle of wine and trying not to be nervous. It was their first time having dinner at his place. Usually they went out, restaurants, movies, walks through different neighborhoods. But tonight, Marcus had offered to cook, and Eleanor had said yes without hesitation. The apartment was modest but warm, filled with books and chess sets and photographs of Marcus's family. Music played softly in the background, jazz, something smooth and soulful. "Come in," Marcus said, taking the wine and her coat. "I hope you like pasta. I'm not a fancy cook, but I make a mean carbonara." "I love pasta." Eleanor walked into the living room and looked around. There were pictures everywhere. Marcus as a kid with Caleb, both of them grinning with missing teeth. Marcus at his college graduation. Marcus teaching chess, his whole life documented in frames on the walls and shelves. "Your family looks wonderful," Eleanor said. "They are. Loud and opinionated and wonderful." Marcus came to stand beside her. "They want to meet you, by the way. Caleb's been asking when I'm going to bring you around." Eleanor's heart skipped. "How do you feel about that?" "I think I'd like it, but only if you're ready. No pressure." "I'm ready. I'd love to meet them." They ate dinner at Marcus's small kitchen table, talking and laughing and arguing playfully about whether knights or bishops were more valuable in chess. The food was delicious, the conversation easy, the chemistry undeniable. After dinner, they moved to the couch with glasses of wine. Marcus put on more music, and they sat close together, not quite touching, but aware of every inch of space between them. "Eleanor," Marcus said quietly, "can I tell you something?" "Always." "That night, when you called the police. For a long time, I was angry about it. Not at you specifically, but at the situation. At living in a world where that kind of fear exists. Where I have to be so careful all the time just to be safe." Eleanor's chest tightened. "I'm so sorry. I know you are, but here's the thing. I'm not angry anymore. Because that night, as terrible as it was, led to this. Led to us. Led to you showing up at chess club and meeting my community and becoming part of my life. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." "Really?" "Really." Marcus took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You could have disappeared after that night, could have hidden from your shame and never looked back. But you didn't. You showed up. You did the work. You changed. And that means more to me than any apology ever could. Eleanor squeezed his hand. You changed me too. You showed me grace when I didn't deserve it. You let me into your world when you had every reason to shut me out. You taught me what real strength looks like. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands intertwined, two people who'd found each other through pain and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. Eleanor, Marcus said softly, I'm falling in love with you. Eleanor's breath caught. You are? I am, and I know it's complicated. I know we still have things to work through, but I needed you to know. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her eyes shining with tears. I'm falling in love with you too. Have been for a while now, actually. I was just too scared to say it. And now I'm brave enough. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. Can I kiss you? Please. Their lips met softly, tentatively, like a question being asked and answered. Then deeper, surer, as all the careful distance they'd maintained dissolved into connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against Eleanor's. That was worth waiting for, he murmured. Eleanor laughed softly. It really was. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, building their future one moment at a time. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, too, people who'd started as strangers, been torn apart by fear, and found their way back to each other through grace and accountability, chose each other fully. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. It was hopeful. It was theirs. And that was everything. Epilogue. 1 year later. The community center ribbon-cutting ceremony was packed with people. Eleanor stood near the front, watching as Marcus addressed the crowd. He wore a suit, not his driver's uniform, but something he'd chosen himself, and spoke with confidence about the vision for this new space. The Reed Family Community Center, named after his grandfather, who'd first taught him about service and dignity and giving back. The funding had come from multiple sources. Grants Eleanor had helped Marcus apply for, donations from the foundation her mother sat on, grassroots fundraising from the community itself. It had taken a year of hard work, late nights, setbacks, and victories. But here they were. Helen Whitmore sat in the front row, looking proud despite herself. She and Eleanor still had their differences, but they'd learned to navigate them with honesty and respect. Helen had even volunteered at chess club a few times, tentatively building bridges with communities she'd spent her life avoiding. Ruth was there too, beaming like a proud parent. She'd told Eleanor months ago that she'd known something good would come from all that pain. Suffering either makes you bitter or better, Ruth had said. You chose better. Caleb stood next to the ribbon, grinning at his little brother with obvious pride. They'd become close, Eleanor and Caleb. He'd given her his blessing months ago, but more importantly, he'd given her his trust. Marcus finished his speech and picked up the oversized scissors. This center exists because community matters, because we all need places where we belong, where we're seen and valued. I want to thank everyone who made this possible. The donors, the volunteers, the families who believed in this vision. His eyes found Eleanor in the crowd. And I especially want to thank someone who taught me that people can change. That mistakes don't define us, but what we do after them does. Eleanor, would you come up here? Eleanor's heart pounded as she walked to the front. Marcus handed her one handle of the scissors, taking the other himself. Together, they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Children ran into the building, eager to explore the new game room and computer lab. Families followed, taking tours, signing up for programs, claiming this space as their own. Marcus pulled Eleanor aside, away from the crowd, into a quiet corner of the lobby. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it, for showing up, for staying, for becoming part of this dream." "Thank you for letting me," Eleanor replied, "for giving me a chance to be better, for teaching me what love really looks like." "And what does it look like?" Eleanor thought about that night in the car, about the fear that had controlled her, about the long journey from that moment to this one, through shame and accountability and small acts of courage repeated day after day. It looks like choosing someone even when it's hard. It looks like grace and honesty and showing up even when you're scared. It looks like building something real on a foundation of truth. Marcus smiled. "It looks like us. It looks like us," Eleanor agreed. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, in the lobby of the community center they'd built together. Around them, the sounds of families and laughter and new beginnings echoed off the walls. They'd come so far from that dark night, that moment of fear, that terrible phone call. They'd walked through fire and emerged changed. Not unscathed, but stronger. More honest. More real. Eleanor had learned that fear wasn't destiny, that she could face her worst self and choose to become someone better. That love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being brave enough to grow. Marcus had learned that grace didn't mean accepting less than he deserved, that trust could be rebuilt, that opening his heart, even after it had been hurt, was worth the risk. Together, they'd learned that healing was possible, that accountability and dignity could coexist with love, that the hardest journeys often led to the most beautiful destinations. This was their story, messy and complicated and beautifully human. This was their beginning, their middle, and the promise of everything still to come. This was love, real, earned, and true. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything